All right, guys, this week we're going to talk about gas exchange and transport. So let's remember that we're back. Last week we talked about what the human body needs, right? And we said it needed oxygen and it needed food, right, that we couldn't bring in ourselves. So we know how food and oxygen are now made. Now we need to bring them into our bodies. So we're going to start with the oxygen. All right, next for objectives and vocabulary. For the objectives, we need to be able to describe gas exchange using the following terms. So lung alveoli diaphragm, capillaries, veins, heart, and arteries we'll get to next week, so don't worry about that part. You need to be able to describe how oxygen and carbon dioxide move into and out of the bodies using diffusion. And then all those vocab words are on Quizlet. So what we're looking at is what process are we talking about? Remember, we had the big four processes that bodies use to stay alive, or organisms use. So which one? And now we're talking about gas exchange. All right, so this is going to be carbon dioxide out, oxygen in. All right, and then what do we need to bring into our bodies? Because that's what we talked about last week. So for this to happen, we need to bring in oxygen from the air, and it was released by plants during photosynthesis. So when we talk about transport, there's two different ways you can look at it. You can look at it as big scale transport and little transport, cellular transport. Okay, so for big scale transport, I want you to think about bringing things into your body. So every organism must exchange energy and nutrients with its surroundings. Right, the digestive system is going to be used to get food and eliminate waste. The circulatory system is used to distribute gases, nutrients, and waste and exchange materials between the blood and the body. The respiratory system is used to exchange gas between external and internal environments. And the excretory system is used to eliminate waste. So the one that we're focused on this week, let me see if I can get my pen to write, is this right here, okay? The respiratory system and how gas goes into and out of the body. So if you look at the respiratory system, the functions of the respiratory system is to bring oxygen in and carbon dioxide out of the body. All right, and the key organs we're going to use to do this is the lungs. And there's a picture of your lungs right here. Okay, and when we talk about lungs, the structure we really think is important is these alveoli. Okay, those are tiny grape-like clusters that are at the bottom of the lungs. It's the last place the air goes, and it's the place where the carbon dioxide and oxygen can change places. All right. The other thing we need to talk about when we talk about our respiratory system is the diaphragm. So this down here, that yellow down there, is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a muscle at the bottom of your lungs, and I know most people think that when they inhale, deep breath in, what they do is actually suck air in, all right? But what happens is when you inhale, you take that muscle at the bottom of your lungs and you pull it down, right? So take a deep breath, and you can like feel your ribs expand, and that muscle pulls down. When that muscle pulls down, it creates a vacuum-like situation where air is going to rush into your lungs, and that's how you get air into your body, is using the diaphragm and those intercostal muscles, those muscles in your ribs that push your rib cage out, and then when you exhale, you push your rib cage back in, the diaphragm moves up, and air pushes out of your lungs. Okay, so that's our big scale transport. We're bringing air into and out of the body, but it still needs to go through the body. That's when we get to our tiny transport, is what I call it, but it's cellular level transport. It's when you put things away, when you get them where they go. So this is getting things where they need to be, into and out of the cell. And they have to pass through the cell membrane. Okay, cell membrane is made of phospholipids. Those have a head and two tails. You learned about that in middle school. All right, there are two types of transport we're going to talk about. The first one is passive. Passive transport does not use energy, and it goes from a high concentration to a low concentration. So it's like rolling down a hill. That's called going with the concentration gradient. So this picture over here, this little man, shows passive transport. Okay, it doesn't take any energy. It's like rolling down a hill. You just roll. Okay, that's with the concentration gradient. The second type of transport is active transport. Active transport actually is like climbing up the hill. So it's going from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. So it's pushing things up a hill, or pushing them or forcing them to an area they don't really want to be. Okay, so think of climbing up a hill. That takes energy. So active transport is going to use energy. It goes against the concentration gradient. Right, and all of these transports are used so that we can go from this uneven state to keeping things in balance and help our body maintain homeostasis or balance, because that's the point of all of this, is to keep us in balance. So passive first, all right? This right now we're talking about passive, so it's not going to use energy. We're moving from a high concentration of molecules to an area with this lower. Okay? So it's going to go with the concentration gradient, and there are two types that we're going to talk about. Right now we're talking about diffusion, which is when the molecules spread out equally. So that's this guy right here. Okay, these guys, this is the high. We have a lot of them on this side. This is the low. We have a little of them. So these ones are going to move over to the side where there's not a lot. Okay, they'll spread out, so they'll go from high, no, this way, no, this way, from high to low, right, until it's equal. Right. The second type is facilitated diffusion. The only difference is this yellow thing right here. This is a protein. Think of it as like a revolving door. It doesn't take energy. You can just push your way through it, right? They're still moving from the area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So on the right on this picture, we have a lot more purples, and on the left, we have a few, right? And they're just moving there from high to low until you're equal, right? They just have the help of a protein. So facilitated means to help. So it's a protein helping. And then my last type is osmosis. That's going to be on my next slide. That's just the diffusion of water. So when you think of osmosis, go, oh, I'm so thirsty, osmosis. So here's our diffusion when we talk about the respiratory system. So at the respiratory system, we have diffusion happening. This is our alveoli. This is our grape-like cluster in the lungs. It's way down the bottom of the lungs, okay? And this is where you have high oxygen here, okay? And on this side, in here, like, look, you only have one. We have a low oxygen, right? In the blood vessels. So in the capillary, we have low oxygen. So our oxygen will move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So it's going to go from high to low until we're evened out, okay? This is how the oxygen gets from our lungs into our bloodstream so we can then move it around, all right? So our cells of our alveoli are 1 cell thick, and the capillaries are 1 cell thick, right? So we have two very thin things, very thin membranes right next to each other. And the alveoli is high in oxygen, the capillary is high in CO2, right? So the oxygen is going to move from the alveoli into the bloodstream, and the CO2 is going to move from the capillary up into the alveoli, right? So you exhale the CO2, and the O2 is then going to be moved throughout the body. So gas exchange is going to happen because of the concentration gradient, or that difference in concentrations, right? And the O2 is now in the body. The oxygen will go through the bloodstream around, and the CO2 will then be exhaled when you breathe. All right, next is osmosis. We talked about that a second ago. Osmosis is just the diffusion of water. And like I said, when you think osmosis, I want you to think, oh, I'm so thirsty, right? Oh, for osmosis, I'm so thirsty. All right, so this is the movement of water, not other molecules. So we don't have like sugar moving, we don't have oxygen moving, we have water moving, osmosis. And we're gonna go from an area where there's lots of water to an area where there's a little water. When you think of this, you gotta sometimes think of like diluting something. If something is very dilute, like, then that means it's really watery, has lots of water. But you can't really take the water out. Like if you have Kool-Aid and it's really diluted, you can't take the water out of it because it's already mixed in. So you have to add more of the mix in. Does that make sense? So we dilute things when we do osmosis. But osmosis is a passive transport, and it does not need energy because it's passive. So the second type of transport was active. This is when we're going to use energy. And on these pictures, I want you to notice, right, there's ATP happening. Okay, we're going from an area of low to an area of high. So an area of low to an area of high. We're going where we have a little to where we have a lot, right? And because of that, we're forcing things to go. All right, so active transport is going to require energy. You can see the ATP is being used, right? It's movement from a low concentration to a high concentration, so we're forcing it uphill. Think of that way. We're going against the concentration gradient. Lots of times with active transport, you'll see things like the word pump. If you see the word pump, that means you're forcing something. So pumps would be active transport. Sodium, potassium pump, they talk about sometimes. Two other types of passive transport are bulk transport. This would be endocytosis and exocytosis. We'll talk about those when we get to bulk transport. So bulk transport. These are when you move big things into your cell. Okay, so things that are too big to just pass through the membrane. there's two different types, okay? So there's endocytosis, right? Endo, I want you to think into, like enter. So endocytosis, what happens is a little particle comes along, usually like a bacteria, and it's almost like a Pac-Man, right? It eats it. So your cell, let's make a cell right here, okay? Your cell sees the little thing, it wraps around it like this, and then it ends up engulfing it like that. So eats it. It goes into your cell in a vesicle. And then exo is opposite, like throws it up. So it'd be like this, goes up, merges with the membrane, and then it spits it out. Okay? So endo, eat, exo, exit. So here's our different transports, our beautiful picture of them. So remember, our required energy ones are here. So those are both active transport. So we have ATP being used, or this one. This is going into the cell or out of the cell, depending on which side the cell's on, right? So endocytosis or exocytosis, see how that molecule is coming to the membrane and it's forming a little vesicle and leaving, right? Whereas these guys, these ones, don't require energy. They go from a high concentration to a lower concentration. They're going down or with the concentration gradient, and you either move water, things diffuse by themselves, or you use facilitated diffusion and you have the help of a protein. Okay, so those are our different types of transport. And what we were transporting this week was oxygen using the respiratory system.